Welcome back to ViolinCello Podcast, Episode 3. And this is a really important episode. The first episode, introduction. The second episode, more introduction. And now everyone's wondering, what direction will this podcast take in Episode 3? People are dying to find out. Because we didn't really broadcast what we were going to talk about. So, what are we going to talk about? Chamber music, a passion of both of ours, it's safe to say. Probably the main passion of mine. It's mostly how I engage with performance these days, is through chamber music, almost exclusively. And I know you also do a lot of chamber music.
Yes.
So I just went to a performance of Emerson String Quartet, and these guys are legends. Needless to say, I mean, nine. I was just looking, 9 Grammy awards, which is insane for one group. Over
Wow.
many years. Over many years. Their first Grammy was in '89. Their last one was like 2009 or 2010, depending on how you look at it. Incredible career. And anyway, it was an all Schubert program. It's their farewell tour. So I wanted to start with a little bit of legacy talk, and then we can segue into chamber music in general. First of all, what is it? Why it matters, and why we need it, and how it helps us as musicians. But first, I just wanted to announce, and David didn't know I was going to do this, but he just got into Pacific Music Festival, so which is one of the most amazing. So maybe in 5 months, if that works out, you never know the future. But if that ends up working out for him, maybe we can record one live from Japan where he'll be. So
Mm,
that is one of the greatest, really the greatest it's an incredible music festival. And
mm.
so he deserves some flowers. He doesn't, I mean, you don't, I also don't really like talk myself up. So anyway, sometimes I need someone to do it for me. So I'm doing it for him. So
Thank
David's
you.
been to Taos. He's been to, well, all over. He won fish off gold medal, junior division. Yeah, anyway, incredible cellist. So let's talk Emerson Quartet. What do you know of Emerson Quartet? You have seen them perform as well, right?
I actually saw them live in Aspen. Uh, it was one of their very few special events where there were no student tickets, and so I was destroyed by that fact. And I happened to be kind of outside the concert hall before the concert started for some reason I don't recall. And some lady came up to me and my friend and said, "Oh, I have one extra ticket. Does one of you want it?" And I had to be selfish for that moment and say I really want it. So I took it, and they played Beethoven Opus 132, the Grosse Fuga, and I believe it was Opus 130. But so two late string quartet giants, and then the Opus 133 fugue, and it was
Quite a program.
unbelievable experience. And I'll never forget their sparing use of vibrato in that particular concert, and I thought it was particularly effective. And given their age, you might ask if it came out of laziness, but I assure you not. It was an incredible timbre that they achieved, and I'll never forget that. They're not one of my favorite ensembles um, these days, but you have to hand it to them for their unbelievable legacy that they've created, and it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I was just just briefly, and then we'll get into some other stuff. But I was just wondering. So Emerson's kind of prime would be like the 80s, 90s, right? As a quartet. And I was just kind of in my head brainstorming, like, who are the other major players? I mean, no pun intended, but the other major like quartets that were going during that time. Like, can you think of any? Like, was Guarneri still going in the 80s,
Oh yeah,
right?
and Guarneri and Cleveland.
And yeah, and into the yeah, and Cleveland, okay. You have the kind of the old Juilliard quartet. I mean, if that makes sense. You have anyone else you can think of?
Not off the top of my head. I've always been a huge Cleveland Quartet fan myself, as far as groups from that era.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just, I mean, in terms of where they stack up, I would all three of those I mentioned, I probably prefer to Emerson. But anyway, it's it's kind of seems like every era there's only so many that get to be great, and I'm so curious how a quartet can win 9 Grammys, and it really makes me wonder like how political some of these awards are. Not to sound cynical, but it's like, you know, out of like it means that like every other year they're winning a Grammy like their whole career, and they're not that much better than many other quartets. But I just during anyway, back to this performance. I was like, and I told David earlier, I was like weeping during this performance. It made such an impact to me. The playing was very, very poor quality, but just the whole notion of like your swan song, like your farewell as a performer. It's like, I mean, I'm still fairly young, but somehow I like fast forwarded in my mind to like really relate to what it would be like in 40 years to like be giving my last performances. It just really affected me. And it also was very affecting to me, even more than this, that these guys clearly like each other. Still, you know, they started in 1976 and they were still having a grand old time on stage. And so whatever else you might say about them, like that's kind of like all of our ideals, right? Where we find players that are really good and we like playing with them our whole career. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, the stars really have to align, and that's a once, that does not happen that often. And trust me from
Yeah,
experience.
I think yeah. I think when it does, you just feel lucky every day, maybe. So I think they still feel lucky, like that they were able to like do this. And also like David Finkel was there as he was their longtime cellist, and he's he stepped down from them in what 2014. I'm guessing. I don't know roughly, but anyway, he was there for the Schubert Quintet, and boy, that was just it was really nice. I mean, most of it was so out of tune, but boy, when it hit, it really hit. So okay, so like moving on to like chamber music. What is chamber music to you?
Well, chamber music to me, oh, that's a tough question. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But
I like
once
tough
you actually try
questions.
to unpack, um, well, let me just speak a little bit about what chamber music is to me and why I think it's particularly valuable to us musicians. Um, I think chamber music First of all, it teaches you a lot of things that other aspects of music making won't teach you nearly as well. Um, it, First of all, it teaches you how to express your ideas to others. And that's from a verbal standpoint or from how you play too, but from a speaking standpoint, you learn how to have deep dialogues. If you're a proactive chair musician, you have to be willing to be vulnerable and participate, which is not as easy as it seems. But if you have that proactivity to have these kind of deep dialogues about music, that's going to teach you unbelievable things about music. Um, Not only by vocalizing your thoughts, which teaches you something, but also hearing what other people think teaches you a lot in the context of a rehearsal or not. Um, and I just like to sidebar here and mention arguments. Arguments are actually a wonderful thing if you know how to use them. Um, Through arguing, a group can really get to, I don't want to say always, but in general, the best possible solution or one of the best possible solutions. I'll just put it this way: if you can't fight for your idea, is it worth fighting for? And so I always love having having arguments in chamber music settings because uh, if I have one idea and a partner has another idea, well, I want to argue about it and see why they think their idea is a better fit. And maybe I'll realize, okay, I was actually a little bit incorrect here. I think their idea works a little bit better for this reason. Or maybe we'll be arguing and they'll realize that I brought up a good point about why my idea makes more sense. And so these dialogues teach you about why you want certain things to go a certain way. Um, so it's not just like, well, I like this to sound like this, or I think it should go like this. Well, why? If you can't say why, then why should we listen to you? And if you can say why, then you're going to perform with all the more um, interest and all that stuff. Um, so it teaches you those communicative skills, speaking and playing, communicating ideas through your playing. Um, you also learn leadership skills. You learn how to be a good leader. Um, and to say a little bit more about that, sorry, I'm going to just say all my thoughts at once. I have so many. Um, it creates a personal sense of accountability to play chamber music because there's not going to be 10 cellos or 14 cellos. There's just you most of the time. And so it creates that certain sense of accountability, responsibility, and honestly creative thinking that you just don't get as much of in an orchestra, an orchestral setting. Um, and of course, you can take these skills to your orchestral playing and beyond whatever kind of music you want to make. And so that's kind of my case for chamber music is you can take the skills that you learned there and apply it to orchestral playing. There's nothing better than an orchestra that communicates with each other. Not just everybody plays their part and stares at the music, but everybody's communicating. The music is so much better that way. Um, and it's also more accessible to younger people in that it's easy to dissect four voices of music and how they work on their own and how they work together as opposed to 30 parts in an orchestra. So I think from that way it's great to study chamber music. And then if I can also just add the benefits of chamber music on an audience, uh, from that perspective, chamber music is particularly intimate, right? It's not like going to an orchestra concert where there's 105 musicians on stage and potentially 2,500 people in an audience. Chamber music is often in a salon setting or a smaller hall. And there's a certain sense of intimacy and power in this type of setting, in this type of music, that can really touch the listener in a profound way. Um, and from a more crude manner or aspect, uh, logistically, chamber music groups are much easier to engage with, hire, collaborate with than a large ensemble, and that's just a great way to reach out to as many communities as possible and spread the power of music as far and wide as we can, which is our job, especially in this day and age, as artist citizens, I like to call us. Um, so that's just a little
Ooh,
bit about
yeah.
chamber music as I understand it. I'm sure you have plenty of thoughts as well.
Yeah. So, like going back to like unpacking a little of this, I think one of the ways or reasons it's so difficult to find a good group is this idea of mutual respect. Like you talked about the arguing aspect, which is just going to happen, right? In any relationship at some point. But especially when you're have people that have strong conviction about music, this will happen. But the reason, like for me personally, it's so hard to find people to play with is you need mutual respect, and it's just very rare. Someone might respect someone a little more than the other. Like it needs to be really high for both. So I have to respect everyone else I'm playing with, or it's not gonna work. They have to respect me, or it's not gonna work. So either of those, so it's really hard for me to find people that I respect. And not in the sense that, I mean, I respect everyone in a sense. But when you're playing in chamber music, there's different philosophies that just simply don't really gel with me, for example. So it's not like a respect of someone as a person, but it's more like agreement with some of their philosophies about music making. When I say respect, maybe. And obviously you have to respect them, like they have to play well, you have to enjoy hearing them, and they have to inspire you. All those, if you're not inspired with who you're playing with, like where you're playing and you're like, oh, that's so beautiful, what I'm getting from these people, it's so beautiful, if that's not there, then it's going to dry up and you're going to want to leave the group. And vice versa, if they're not inspired by you and your ideas and what you bring to the table, it's not gonna work. So I've always had, and like every, oh yeah. Yeah, you have a thought
I,
there.
it's, that's a funny setting, raising your hand. I just you got me thinking about some ideas and one little experience I had at Taos when we were rehearsing Brahms Viola Quintet Opus 111. And at some point, the second violinist was talking, I think, to one of the violists, the second violist, maybe it was the first violinist. I just know it wasn't to me. And this violinist said, "I just don't see a musical reason why you're doing this." And if there wasn't enough respect there, that could come off as very disrespectful. But in our setting, it was okay, and uh, and that kind of challenged the other person to come up with a defense as to why they were doing something. And um, first of all, the respect needs to be there, and when that respect is there, these dialogues can happen, and the music can really flourish. But that'll always stick with me. I don't see a musical reason why you're doing that, and so I always ask myself that question these days. Um, so that was a really interesting. Not to interrupt, but I thought that was very interesting dialogue that was had, and something I'll always remember.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So for all you out there that perform your instruments, that is probably the number one takeaway from this episode, is that you always need a musical reason for what you're
Mhm.
doing. And like you pointed out, chamber music is the best way to dissect all these ideas. You also mentioned something else that to me is a major reason I love chamber music, and that is accountability. Because at even in really great professional orchestras, there is accountability. Well, there's tons of accountability until you're kind of tenured. but you can kind of skate by without practicing much or being super sharp. That's just a well-known secret. And you do not always have to be on the top of your game. And there's not really anyone that's going to point you out necessarily and say, listen, by yourself, go ahead and play this page in Bartok Concerto for Orchestra. You go right now. No one's going to do that to you. Whereas in chamber music, every time you play, that's happening to you. And in rehearsal, people are like, can we just hear you play this? And like, you're on the spot and you better be able to play it. If
Not
not,
only
that
am I better,
respect is going to dry up that we were talking about,
yeah,
and it's not going to work.
yeah,
so so it forces you
yeah.
to really stay sharp and on your game, and also stay, yeah, very professional, very focused. And you had something to add there?
I was just gonna to add, like, not only you'd said like you better be ready to play it, not only had you better be ready to play it, you better be ready to defend it and play it exactly how you intend it to be, because the way that you intend it to be and the way that you play it, that doesn't just affect you, that affects the person playing in harmony with you, or you can spin this a million different ways, but the way you do something, even if somebody doesn't have the same thing, really affects how they're going to do what they're doing. And so that just takes so much preparation in advance. It's really interesting.
Well, yeah, and it feels like backstabbing in a way, like you're being betrayed. If someone like plays this way in rehearse, I mean, we talked about spontaneity. That that needs to be there. So I mean, within reason, you can play around with things, even in performance or. But occasionally, if there's some idea that you go beyond that spontaneity, like you do a different idea that just is, it's not gonna work. It can feel like you're being betrayed at being, like, wait, you did it this way, but maybe you were doing it this way because, you were whatever, not prepared, or, and not then you decided to do it this way. So that communication needs to always be there in chamber music. Like if you're gonna make a big switch, it's like backstage, you're like, I might do it this way, and that's fine. But just some sort of a tip off there, so that you're not like that. That can really offend people. So I mean, I've had that happen multiple times. It's like, hey, we agreed to do it this way, and now you're doing this. So there's that trust that you cannot break. I feel like no going rogue either. And that's something you don't really have to deal with in orchestra. That type of responsibility. Oh yeah, another thing you mentioned is like the accessibility. So I find that to be very like true for me too. That chamber music is the most accessible. Like you said, it's easier, it travels easier. And I think an obvious, you said intimate, but part of that, like in the different halls and different settings you can play in, part of that is that you can just physically be closer. So it's like as a child, like they can like, an orchestra needs some kind of a stage or some kind of, it needs more space to, like, you can't be close to all the players. But in chamber music, you can literally be like 10 feet from everybody. Like, boom, right there. And I always appreciated, even though, like at University of Illinois, where I did graduate school, like this Follinger Hall, which is a huge hall there, wonderful acoustics. But for certain chamber music concerts, they would they would only have it on stage. So they would set all the chairs up on stage And so the hall was empty, but it was all happening on stage. So everyone was really close. I thought that was a great way to like reach students. When my students would go, I'd be like, yeah, you got to go. You can sit like by me, like 5 feet from everything going on. And they just loved it. They felt so much more involved with the performance. So basically, I just wanted to echo everything you said there about accessibility. So, do you have any like, I mean, we kind of talked about this in the first episode a little bit, but about like different repertoire and that sort of thing. I know you've always loved Beethoven. I Beethoven's probably my favorite, just for the record. Even though I said something different, a few weeks ago. But do you have any thoughts on repertoire, like the chamber music repertoire?
I mean, there's just so many. I mean, the piece I mentioned earlier is a masterpiece, especially the second movement of the Brahms Opus 111 Viola Quintet, the Brahms sextets, the all the Brahms piano chamber music is fabulous. The piano quartets, the piano trios, um, all the Beethoven quartets. I mean, I just find that I made it a point after my sophomore year in college to listen to all of the Beethoven quartets and the fugue. And ever since then, I've continually listened to them to try to keep myself familiar. And um, there's always, no matter what I'm feeling, usually when I'm feeling very upset, there's always a particular quartet or a particular movement that I can um, resonate with and listen to and feel like, wow, Beethoven and I are pretty close here, and that's a really special type of thing that I can't find anywhere else as a musician. That strange sense of comfort when I'm very upset about something to listen to Beethoven's music and share in that struggle that I can tell he clearly experienced from writing those things that he wrote. It's unbelievable. The Janacek string quartets are great. The Tchaikovsky piano trio is fabulous. There's
Hmm.
just so many. I mean, Debussy and Ravel quartets. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think if I can just jump in, like all these names you're saying are like the best composers, like in history, right? So, in other words, the greatest composers all wrote chamber music. And I think that may be like there's great music. So even on top of just the everything we talked about, that it's just the intimacy of it, and all the great composers felt the same way, and the way they can, you know, show the struggle that they're going through chamber music. So all these composers felt the same way about it back then. The great composers now, they write for chamber music, and I think that's what makes it so, like, the tradition so powerful that we have from chamber music, because alongside orchestra this was also developing, not to get all music history, but for Haydn and so on, all the way till now it's just developing like crazy, and all the composers were getting in on it, like the salon concerts. And so there's nothing new there. Like there's always been this desire and this hunger for chamber music, and I find that really compelling.
and along those lines, if you take Beethoven, for example, the things he was doing in his chamber music, particularly the late quartets, but even the middle period stuff, really, really everything, all of it, everything. In general, with Beethoven, the things that he was doing in those pieces of chamber music was completely unlike what he was doing in his symphonies or his masses, things like these bigger works, he explored far more in the chamber music and tried much more new, different, unique things, crazy things that you just will not find in the larger scale repertoire. So it was really like a science lab, if you will, an experimentation, breeding ground, whatever you want to say. Um, and that's really cool to see Beethoven and everybody, but Beethoven particularly, um, experiment with new things and new ways of making music. I mean, you listen to some of those late quartets, and they're, I mean, this is what he died in 1827. This is almost 200 years later. There's some weird things in there that you would say, "Whoa, that sounds pretty modern to me." But you listen to it and then you find it's Beethoven. It's unbelievable, and you just won't find that in the larger scale music. So that's me advocating for exploring these works.
So, professional tips. Number one, know the score. You have to, for like anyone, and we all can get, I can get lazy and be like, well, I kind of know it, or I kind of know how it goes, but do you really know the dynamics? Do you really know, you know, the five play? You can get very detailed with, not to get too geeky, but like, why in three voices is this the dynamic, and in this voice it's this dynamic. Like you need to be making those observations, like you said, not just playing wise, but you also should have opinions not just about like your playing, but everyone's playing, and ideas about how it all goes together, and ideas about the composer and his life at that time, and ideas about different types of character and emotion that goes into this, and the reason for the on and on and on. So number one is this: you need to know the score. And by the way, that also goes for orchestra. But uh training that in chamber music though is a great place to start it, because orchestra, it's the scores are very bloated, and it's a lot more work to know the flute part, the bassoon part. You know, I'm inspired by, speaking of chamber music, by like the Orpheus, orchestra. They've never had a conductor, and that's super inspiring. In other words, they all study the score, so every orchestra member knows the score. Like they all know what the flute, the bassoon, cello, bass, viola, trumpet. They know what everybody has, and they don't even need a conductor because they're such great chamber musicians. Uh, anyway, so that's my thought. Do you have any tips? That's my tip.
Yeah,
Know the score.
yeah, I have a bunch of things. I have to organize myself. Classic David. Um, what you said something I already forgot, but what I wanted to say about what you said, uh, with as far as the score, um, various composers were at various levels of specificity. Beethoven and Mahler being some of the most specific, right? And Debussy, and other composers being very non-specific. And in any case, the score serves as the closest available key to what was going on in the composer's head at that moment in time. It's not the music, it's just a key. The music is what we interpret that paper, those black and white notes as. And so when you look at it that way, that's a lot of work for us to do. And Beethoven makes it a little bit easier in some ways, but honestly, he makes it harder with all that specificity. But so that's why we have discussions and we have ideas, because
Schumann.
yeah,
Whew.
the music is not the music without us. It's just black and white. It's just a key, a map. We have to interpret it. We have to get to the destination, and so that's a lot of work. Um, I just wanted to add, you mentioned knowing the score and knowing all these things, also knowing your role within harmony, um, knowing this isn't applicable in every second of a piece, but knowing, what role is my note? What is it? Is it adding tension? Is it taking us somewhere? Is it the root, the third, fifth, seventh, something else? Um, and how do you balance that? And how do you tune that? I once had a coaching where the coach asked us, well, how do you tune if you're working in a string quartet, how do you tune your part in the practice room without anybody? And I raised my hand and I said, well, a drone. And this person said, very, very well-known person, said, that is the exact wrong answer. But thank you for saying that. Like we needed that to be said. And so this person went on to say that you need to tune everything with a tuner. And I've gotten various opinions since, mostly
I mean you can name drop if you want. It's okay. I'm curious now.
I will tell you after this. But in any case, you know, I disagreed actually because I think that's a little close-minded to say that we can only tune such a thing with a tuner. Understandably, the point being made that like if you use a drone, like that will only work for certain notes. You have to change the drone every second, like blah blah blah, and like you want to tune with the tuner because X, Y, and Z piano, blah blah blah. A lot of bullshit. But what I personally believe is and what I implement is I do a lot of not just in tunes but in everything. I would say I do 75% with a drone and 25% with the tuner, and that way you get some of both, and you can understand the different methods of tuning. And you know, if you only tune with a tuner, that might be good if you are doing a lot of your work with piano, or, playing sonatas. Like if I have a recital coming up of sonatas, yes, I'll go through the entire piece with a drone, check everything, see what my tendencies are. Okay, but tuning to a tuner is tuning with your eyes. Tuning to a drone is tuning with your ears, which obviously is preferable. You want to train your ears, and you train that by putting on a drone and listening to the harmony that you're creating between those two notes. A tuner, if you're not careful, is just you looking at the screen. Oh, let me adjust that. But why? I don't know. I can't hear. I'm just using my eyes. You're not going to have a tuner on stage. So I think that there's a great need for both. I'll let you chime in, and then I want to share something I saw on Menachem Pressler's door the other day at IU. But please chime in.
Yeah, so pianists, if you're listening right now, just know that we really do struggle with intonation all the time. So that's your takeaway. It's very hard to play in tune for anyone that's not a piano. So, and for the rest of us, like tuning philosophies are radically different. I I've said this before, probably not on this podcast, so I can say it, but like the Jupiter Quartet, their tuning philosophy compared to like my quartet now's tuning philosophy, it is radically different. And you might just scratch your head and say, "What do you mean?" But there's and it's hard to even explain because it's so complicated. Like you were going on explaining different ways to tune and just exactly what you do with a leading tone and exactly how high the third should be, say if it's an chord versus if you're a solo player, how different that should be, that same note. And it's always shifting and so I would say my quartet now it's much more variable than what I studied it in graduate school, like because I happen to know that quartet super well, like very, very well, because I never missed a performance of theirs. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. But what's this story about Pressler's door?
Well, I have immense respect for Pressler. as a musician,
He's a
and
legend.
yeah, unbelievable. And anyways, I was at IU the other day for an audition, not for IU, something else. And I just decided I had to walk by Pressler's door. He's like a musical god. And on his door was this thing called 12 Quartet Commandments. Not written by him, but he had posted it on his door. And I don't know, should I read all 12? Maybe, maybe not. But the first
Read
one
him.
is,
Do you have him?
yeah, you are sharp unless proved innocent. Number two, play where your colleague is, not where he should be had he counted as well as you. Three, check your rhythm with a metronome. Check your rhythm with a metronome before the rehearsal rather than letting your colleagues check it for you in the rehearsal. Your metronome is a true friend. Number four, rehearsal is all about establishing guilt. Number five, you're going to love this one. Admit guilt straight away, as it is more painful having it extracted from you. Number six,
That
never
is that is
be, it's hilarious. Never be the first to stop when the quartet is sight reading, however wrong you are. Number seven, sleeping with a colleague's wife can prejudice purely musical discussion. What the hell? Number eight, along the lines of what you said, knowing the score is power. Number nine, be patient. It may take years, but your colleagues will catch up with your musical vision someday. That's the respect thing. Number 10, be confident in the next rehearsal as you alone saved the last concert. Number 11, a properly functioning string quartet is a compliment-free zone. Should you nevertheless receive a compliment, rest assured it is always tactical. And number 12, that's so true. That's so true. Number 12, when a colleague, this is also so true.
uh,
I'm guilty of this all the time. When a colleague says they're having a problem with a passage and can you play it with them, they invariably mean the problem is you. A little sassy, but
yeah,
a lot of truths in there.
yeah, that's yeah, I don't know. The one I'll probably remember is number seven, but uh that's I I'm not I'm just not sure where that came from. But yeah, yeah, you should be careful about your, you know, relationships in the quartet, no doubt. Uh,
Yeah. Hmm.
so thanks for sharing those, and thank you, Mr. Pressler, for your
Yeah.
words of wisdom.
I think that's an excellent point
Now I
there.
have to think. Now I feel like I should have something on my door. I never have. My rooms always. My teaching rooms never have anything, and it's just. I'm embarrassed now. I feel like I gotta have something. I need to find some commandments for my students. But yeah, what would you have? What's the number one thing? Like if you were to have one quote on your wall, like music or not even music, just any. If you were to have one quote, you've got to, your studio, you've got a nice, 50th floor, Manhattan, New York. You've got a beautiful flat where you teach. What's the one thing you have on the wall?
Well,
You can only pick one.
that's something came to my mind straight away as far as like putting it on a teaching studio, which is from the Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway. And let me see how quick I can read
Great
this.
book.
It's a little bit of
Great book.
but what would you call it? Like I forget what you would call it. Kind of like an analogy, but I'm forgetting the right word. Um, when we plant a rose seed in the earth, we notice that it is small, but we do not criticize it as rootless and stemless. We treat it as a seed, giving it the water and nourishment required of a seed. When it first shoots up out of the earth,
This is too long for a wall, but keep going.
you can put this on a
Please keep.
wall. When it first shoots up out of the earth, we don't condemn it as immature and underdeveloped, nor do we criticize the buds for not being open when they appear. We stand in wonder at the process taking place and give the plant the care it needs at each stage of its development. The rose is a rose from the time it is a seed to the time it dies. Within it, at all times, it contains its whole potential. It seems to be constantly in the process of change, yet at each state, at each moment, it is perfectly all right the way it is. So what does that mean? We all grow at different paces. We all spurt at different times, but we're all that same rose, no matter where we are.
No, that's great. The reason I laugh was because you were reading it in a way that was like very dramatized from the way you normally speak. That's why I was laughing. I mean, it's a great quote. And I agree with it, but it's maybe a little too flowery, no pun intended, or pun intended. Uh,
Oh,
I think on
oh.
my wall, I would just have, and this is honestly what's popped in my head, and I say this all the time. It's from a book by Joseph Szigeti, who's one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century. He's a legend. He's amazing. Great violinist, great teacher. And he wrote a book, and I forget the name of the book, but you can something like Art of the Violin or something like this. And on the very first page, he has a preface. And on that page, he says, "There is no substitute for perfect intonation." And then he says it again at the end of the page. There is no substitute for perfect intonation. So that's probably what I would have on my wall. But that's not really that inspiring. Uh, so maybe, not sure what that says about me,
Oh, that's
but
that's funny.
I would probably have like a pic. What I really want on my wall, and I just can't afford it. But the only thing I want on my wall is like a great artist to come in and paint my wall with murals. And I want a mural, and I want these great violinists just all the way around the walls. I want Heifetz to be there, and Milstein, and you name it, Schering and Grumio, and James Ennis. I've loved James Ennis. I gotta admit, mad respect for not just dead people, but just great violinists. And so that's what I would want on my wall. It's just I'm big into this like music shrine thing, you know, like where you step into a room and it's a different world. Like it's not like what you before you open the door. You open the door and it's like Narnia or something. You go through that closet and it's like whoa. You can't even believe where you are. It's amazing. So even though my walls are bare, that's the feeling when hopefully when my students step into my room. Okay, well, what what's so what's so funny? So I laughed at your quote, and now you laugh at mine. So we're even.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah,
Okay, I
yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent. I love those ideas. It's just funny the dichotomy between all that and then a baby blue wall behind you.
okay. Well, Baby Blue is that's a very musical killer. So, okay, so I think that'll be a wrap. Uh, Takeaways here: chamber music's really important. It's a great way to reach people. It's awesome. and you should be playing chamber music as much as you can, and it will help you with everything related to music, and that's really everything. And yeah, final thought.
Keep listening to chamber music as much as you can.
Absolutely. Listen, listen, listen. Listen to Emerson. Listen to Cleveland.
Eben Quartet,
Listen to.
Eben.
They're amazing. Yeah. A lot of respect for those guys. My favorite quartet's probably Budapest. So if you want to go super old school, if you want to hear Brahms, yeah, whew. So anyway, we'll save that for another episode. But all right, till next time. Thanks for listening to episode 3. Please subscribe. And what else do? You like? Yeah, hit the like. Is there something else like follow us? Do we have
That's
anything to
right.
follow?
No.
Follow anyway. Uh, comments. Yeah, write comments. Yeah, uh, comments are great. We love comments. If we don't like them, we'll just not allow them. So yeah, write them anyway. and,
Let's make some conversational chamber music.
let's argue, like David mentioned. Let's have good argument, productive. All right, ciao, ciao. Now, how do you stop the recording? Okay.